Welcome back to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. Today, we are joined by Eric Steele, the Chief Revenue Officer of a company called SIB. I've been in the restaurant tech industry for 30 years and I'd never heard of SIB. And so I'm excited to share with you guys all of the cool things that they do to help your restaurant operate as efficiently as possible by digging into your costs and helping not change the customer experience, but ultimately deliver more profit to your brand. They also built an AI, and it wouldn't be a podcast in 2026 if we didn't have AI sprinkled in somewhere, called SpendBrain, that allows you as an operator to dig into your expenses and ask questions of it and try and understand what it is that you can do to continue to be more profitable. If you don't know me, my name is Julian. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of CBS North Star. We wrote the North Star point of sale solution for multi-units. Please check us out at cbsnorthstar.com. And now on to the show. Welcome back to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. I thank everyone out there for joining us. As I like to say each and every time, I know you guys have got lots of choices, so thanks for hanging out. Today is oftentimes people's, a difficult subject to go through, but it's very, very, very important, especially in today's day and age. So I'm excited for Eric to dig into kind of what they've been building and how they're really solving a lot of challenges within the restaurant space. But before we do that, Eric, why don't you introduce yourself? Who is Eric? Where did Eric come from? Kind of how did you get into the space? And then we can talk a little bit about what you guys have been doing out in the market.
Sure. Thank you, Jeremy. Great to be on here. It's an honor. Eric Steele. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at SIB. We are in the cost reduction business, primarily for multi-site, multi-location franchise operators and restaurants. We work with most of the largest groups in the US. SIB's been around for 35 years, and we make reducing costs as easy as spending money. And it turns out that's really important to most companies, but particularly restaurant ownership groups. Procurement is decentralized, it's fragmented. Many of our clients have hundreds or thousands of locations and lack that central visibility of their spend. So we developed something called SpendBrain, which is an AI spend ontology, meaning it's a knowledge graph of the client's spend data, contracts, invoices, all assembled into one place where you can talk to your spend. And then we have an incredible group of human experts that actually are the moat and the really important part of our business. 600 employees, 400 of whom are experts in waste, linens and laundry, telecom, SaaS, and they actually negotiate directly with vendors and help our clients reduce their costs. So that's who we are. My background is I spent about 15 years at Forrester prior to being involved in private equity backed B2B services companies, including specialty tax, and then joined SIB about 2 years ago.
Very cool. And I know I said it on the onset. Actually, before I go any further, we got about a minute and 40 seconds in before we talked about AI, which it wouldn't be a podcast in 2025, 2026 without talking about AI. And so I'm excited to dig into kind of what you guys have been doing. And I know this is not everybody's favorite topic, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about why it's so important to consider not just a tool like what you guys are doing, but even if you're doing some of the stuff that you guys are doing manually, talk to me a little bit about what the value proposition is to understanding your spend and how to go about it. Because I just think all too often people don't think about that. It is one of the core, I mean, it is a huge cost within the business, whether that's food cost or labor costs and understanding it. And then there's all of the incidental costs that you kind of mentioned, but I'd love for you to, I guess, set the stage for people to say, why is this conversation so important?
It's a great question. I'll pose a question back. As you think about it as a business owner, what is easier? Selling 3 to 5% more. So selling more, which would include cost of sale, cost of goods sold, the employees, the marketing assets you got to drive to get folks in the door, or savings with zero guest impact, just making smart decisions about where you're spending money and reducing those costs in a really simple, easy way. And I think most folks would answer, hey, it's so much easier just to save money, to reduce our spend. And so that with that kind of premise, that's how we approach clients is, 70% of companies don't know where 15% or more of their contracts are with vendors. And when they do find
so that sounded generous, quite frankly. I
I've
know.
worked with a
I
lot of
yeah.
restaurant brands over the years, man. And you're like 15%. There's people that they're like, I have a contract for my food service
Well,
provider or my linens provider or any of that. Sorry, I'll let you keep going, but I think you're being generous in the food service world.
you're exactly right. I think if we took a look at that number again this next year, it's probably going to be half, I would imagine,
Hmm.
if not more. And when companies do know where their contracts are, it doesn't get easier
Yeah.
because, for example, the average waste invoice has roughly 20% of it is errant, right? 20% of those bills have invoice errors. SaaS, some 60% of SaaS licenses are underutilized. Telecom, 35% of telecom invoices include duplicate lines, redundant lines. This goes on and on. One of the waste haulers that's very prominent has near 15,000 unique GL codes that can appear in an invoice. How on earth does a company who has multiple relationships with multiple vendors, how could they ever track and monitor with all the invoices coming in? We have one restaurant group client that has couple 100,000 invoices that come in every month. And so, unless they have an army of 10,000 contract managers that look at every single invoice, map it against every contract, and have domain expertise around that vendor so they can spot all the anomalies and the errors, it is impossible to navigate. And so,
Yeah.
we built SpendBrain to solve for this. You now have a tool, frankly, a digital employee that is looking at all of your contracts as it processes every invoice. It maps back to your original contract and you can teach it. You can teach the brain. Our clients even name the brain. There's some pretty fun names that they choose. I won't list them here, but they get to teach their brain and really talk to it. Why did our waste bill go up in Chicago last quarter? What is the per cubic yard cost of waste in Maine this month? Why has our telecom bill increased quarter over quarter? They can actually engage in dialogue with it. And what we're finding is that this tool saves on average around 3% of all indirect spend. And so
Wow.
that's powerful. That's very powerful for companies to turn on. And to your original question, doing this not only catches what otherwise the human eye might miss, but maybe most importantly, it takes the team that would have been doing that laborious, monotonous work and it pushes them back into more strategic things. They can now focus on better vendor relationships, maybe consolidating vendors and do strategic things from a contract management procurement perspective that otherwise they couldn't because they would spend most of their time mining invoices and detecting errors.
Yeah. No, and I think I guess I'd love, Eric, for you to share a little bit about those people that are out there. So again, food costs and labor costs are probably the two biggest, prime costs within restaurants. And so a lot of people are like, I got my food costs figured out. And I guess what speaks directly to those people that are like, I've got a food cost management system. I know I'm at 18%. That's what my target is. I'm hitting my 18%. Talk to that user out there because I know that you have to overcome this objection. You and your team have to overcome this objection every single day with restaurant brands that are saying, well, I'm at 18%. My target is 18%. But you talked about it on the onset. There's 2, 3, 4% that you may be able to change by just looking at it. Let's talk to that user that's out there. And then let's dig into a little bit of the ways that you guys continue to see suppliers. I've got a contract price. They're not going to screw me, or it's my buddy that's down the street. He's my wine guy. Again, I've heard them all. I've been in the space for 30 years. I know a lot of those same things. So let's talk to those listeners out there that are like, I got my food costs figured out. I'm at 18 points. That's where I said I was going to be. What are the things that you guys can do and how is it not impact the guests, but also just drive profit straight to the bottom line with the things that you guys are able to look at?
Yep. Great question. I'll answer with a story, which is one of my favorite stories. We had a client that felt that specific to specialty gas, so CO2 with all their fountain drinks, that
Mm-hmm.
they had a great deal and they did with their suppliers. But using anomaly detection with SpendBrain, this ontology, we started to see anomalies month to month, week to week, day to day. In some cases, one location would have twice the CO2 charge than one that was identical size, similar zip code, right? Well, what we uncovered was actually a leak. We discovered a leak in multiple locations with CO2
That's
that
amazing.
they would not have known. I mean, it's going to show up on an invoice a little bit higher, maybe marginally higher, but over time that's compounding. And so by identifying that leak, we actually help them to improve the relationship with that vendor,
We cut and recovered actually $10,000 plus in a couple different locations. And we're able to really stop a literal leak, a figurative leak. And so one thing we tell our clients is you likely have a good deal, but we can test it for you. Make sure what we've asked vendors to do. We've asked 1,000 other clients, 1,000 other clients have asked the same thing of those vendors. So we know the data, we know the answers to the test when we go to those vendors.
Yeah.
We have, over the 35 years we've been in business, enough data around every vendor and every price that we can come in and give you an educated understanding of whether you do have a good deal or not. And then we let the data guide the way. We'll look at your 12-month vendor payment history. We'll map it based on every geo and location and vendor. We'll benchmark it. We'll tell you if you're really in a great position, if you have a great deal, or if in fact the data says otherwise.
Mhm.
But I can't stress enough the actual graphing of contract to invoice, because that's the truth.
Yeah.
You might have a good deal, but are you actually being billed in accordance with that deal?
That was where I was going next, Eric, is we were working with a 45 unit franchise group. And as we started looking through some of their contracts for credit cards being one of the ways that these software companies have monetized. And again, I'm not looking to get into a political battle of whether it's right or it's wrong. I have my own, theory. And if you want to hear about it, you can talk to me offline. But we looked at it and they supposedly had contract pricing with their credit card provider. And they had wild swings, 100% swings from store to store. And so one franchisee was getting totally taken advantage of by their current provider, whereas another one wasn't. The other thing that I guess I would tell you is you might have contract pricing, but different geos as you move out to different distribution warehouses for things like you talked about CO2, but food, you might be in a different warehouse, coming out of a different warehouse. They've got a different pack size and they don't honor that contract price because it's a different pack size. It's a different SKU number. And so I guess talk me through both of those scenarios because I see them very commonly where corporate says we've got a good price. Corporate might be in that good price category. They've got 15 stores of the 45 that are theirs. They're in the right price range. They might be a little bit of a variance here or there, but then they ask for the franchisees invoices and they realize, whoa, 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 what we had agreed to, it might have been a clerical error, or it might be something directly related to, hey, they're looking to make more profit and they know nobody's going to tell the difference.
Well, you're touching on the root of why we have been around for 35 years and why we've worked with over 10,000 clients and the majority of the largest restaurant groups in the US. We suspect, and I won't go so far as to say that we know, but we suspect that clients are taken advantage of by some vendors who bank on the fact that procurement can be fragmented and decentralized, and that, going back to that stat, that 70% of companies cannot find 15%, or you and I believe way more, of their contracts. Anecdotally, from my experience, when we go to a vendor and say, hey, the client would like their contract, more often than not, the vendor doesn't want to give the contract. But why is that? Why would that be? Because, and we've coined a term, vendor shenanigans. We have a whole library of what these shenanigans are, from a particular vendor that will change the mat that you have procured when it's delivered, to a particular shipping vendor that uses jet fuel as their fuel surcharge rate, but you wouldn't know it unless you dig really deep into the contract. There are endless examples of this, and we suspect that the vendors bank on how difficult it would be for you to navigate that. And so when we talk about SpendBrain, one client actually said, this is like a weapon you've given us to fight back against the spend more world. It's never been easier ever in history today than it is right now to just pay vendors fast. There's a lot of really cool technologies that, and frankly, we use some of them too. Ramp, Coupa, Ariba. There's elegant technology out there that almost with military grade efficiency helps you quickly pay a vendor. Well, we would say time out, turn the tables on spend. Let's actually give you something that can detect whether A, you have a good deal, B, if you have a good deal, are you being billed in accordance with that deal?
Yep.
And C, when we fix any errors, do we ensure that in perpetuity they're fixed? Because there's many examples where we can reprocure, renegotiate, fix errant anomalous spend, and then 6 months later, it all comes back. Because
100%.
Because the vendor also suspects maybe they're not going to always be vigilant about that, right? And so This is really, we look at ourselves as a tool or a weapon, as one client said, to really fight back against this spend more world. And it's a passion for us. We love to do it. It's why we get up every day.
Yeah. Last line of questioning, I guess, before we dig into kind of what it looks like to engage, Eric, is how big of a impact can you make in those non-core costs, non-labor costs, food costs, because those are the two biggest prime costs. And a lot of times
Yeah.
people have something figured out there. They might be a percent here or there, but you've got your napkins, and you've got your, laundry. There's so many different costs that,
Yeah.
again, a 3% or a 5% increase in them might not move the needle because it's $100 bill and now it's 105 or 110. But again, back to our early conversation, I'd love for you to share a little bit about those things that people typically don't look at too closely because it's a small dollar amount. It comes in every month. It's kind of in that same range. It could be your telecom you talked about. It could be your SaaS. It could be, there's so many different little things. I'd love for you to talk about what a large impact you can make in those areas as well.
Yeah. Outside of food and labor, which, as you correctly pointed out, biggest buckets of spend, the categories that we most frequently see where we can directly impact and help clients achieve savings: waste, near the top of that list; credit card processing, which you mentioned earlier; bank fees, often overlooked, significant opportunity for most clients; linens and laundry; specialty gas. Those are the big ones that we see. And across those, 20 to 34% savings is what we're averaging.
Wow.
And on the high end, 34%, 34 to 37%, we typically see with bank fees. And we could have a whole discussion just on that because the opportunity there is vast. And like anything, we don't change vendors. This isn't about going to a client and saying, we'll find you a better deal, switch vendors. This is no operational disruption. This is keep the vendor you have, but make sure that you're getting the right deal and that they're billing you correctly.
Mhm.
And in some cases, re-procure or kind of renegotiate what you have in accordance with what you need. But 20 to 34% savings between those core categories. We look at 90% of supplier vendor spend, but those are the five that continue to jump out as huge opportunities for the restaurant space.
Yeah, real quick, because you've mentioned it 2 or 3 times. Define waste. What does waste exactly mean to those
Yeah.
listeners that are out there? Because I think I understand it, but I'd love to make sure, because you brought it up 2 or 3 times. It says
Sure.
waste is a big opportunity for everybody.
Today's episode is brought to you by Restaurant Technologies Incorporated. They are the leaders in automated cooking oil management. And if you're not familiar with them, they've been on the show a few times to share some of the unique and cool things that they've been doing in the oil management space. They have an end-to-end closed-loop automated system that helps deliver, monitor, filter, collect, and recycle your cooking oil. Sounds like a lot. It's because they do a ton to help clean up one of the dirtiest jobs and most dangerous jobs in your kitchen. You can check them out by visiting rti-inc.com or by calling 888-779-5314. They've already helped over 45,000 customers in the United States with their cooking oil, so clearly they're doing something right. Now back to the episode.
I hear about it when I watch Robert Irvine or Gordon Ramsay come in and start screaming at restaurant owners that are failing as far as their waste. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that is before we dig into what engagement
Yeah, I'm
looks
sorry.
like with your
I
team.
should be clear with that. It is your waste hauler. So getting trash out of the restaurant, right? And so whether it's Waste Management or Republic or there's a variety of vendors. This is looking at, particularly if you have hundreds or thousands of locations, what is the mix of hauler relationships? Do you have a national relationship with a big hauler? Do you have regional haulers? And we have really the best in class team that going on 18 years, legacy business called Vector that really was boutique, just extraordinary waste negotiation firm that SIB acquired a couple years ago. True experts, true domain expertise, and really that team manages hundreds of thousands of different invoices that are coming in, evaluating, looking at them, analyzing them. But one client comes to mind. I'll give you an example of this related to waste. Very big company, 3,000 plus locations. We looked at through SpendBrain their national waste relationship, and in 8 days detected 43 anomalies in just 1 month of data and identified 1.4 million in errant spend. So that gives you a sense for the order of
That's a
magnitude.
huge needle mover, obviously. 43, that's huge.
And that's 1 month, one spend category, just processing those invoices, detecting anomalies. And in some cases, it was what we call route price anomalies, where you would have identical routes, identical size dumpsters, but the price was almost 2x one
Yeah.
versus the other. And so some of that was just errant billing. Some of it was an opportunity to reprocure and renegotiate that location. There's many other examples, overage fees. You know, there's, as I said earlier, 15,000 unique GL codes with some of these vendors. Extremely complicated, but that's what we're able to knowledge graph. Using our expertise and the client's data, we build them that brain that can track all this.
Yeah. So Eric, what does engagement look like? I guess, I'm sitting on the other end of the phone. I own a franchise of one of these stores that's 3,000 stores, and they're not already working with you guys. Or I'm an individual owner operator and I want these savings. I want this help. What does that look like? Because I could see them being like, this is so overwhelming. I don't have all my invoices. I don't want the shame of not knowing where my contracts are because I know I don't have that. I guess walk our listeners through, what does it look like to engage with you guys, and how do you guys get into this but not get them so overwhelmed that now they can't focus on running their business, but they can still get the savings that you guys can help with?
Yeah. Great question. So it all starts with a kickoff where we make it our first order of business to find the data. So whether that's APIing into their AP system or 365 or Yardi or Coupa, whether it's determining if they have a shared folders or where is the data, where are the contracts, and where are the invoices coming from. The invoices are typically really easy to track. Those tend to be automated in some form or fashion, and we can via read-only access or API ingest that. Contracts are a little bit trickier, but that's item number one. And we tell the clients, this is easy in the sense that once we have the data, we do the rest. The hard part initially for the client, which can be a little painful, but it's a good pain because you do it once and then you don't have to deal with it again, right? It's just finding this data, right? One of the services we provide for clients who can't find contracts is we'll get a letter of authorization and we'll go on their behalf.
That was
to the
going to be
vendor,
one of my questions. One of the
right?
clients that was trying to negotiate with their credit card vendor said they needed a letter from a lawyer for every EIN that they needed the contracts for. And I
Right.
was like, really? And back to your shenanigans comment that you made earlier. I'm sure it's a delay tactic because they know that getting a lawyer to write a letter for every single EIN times 40 some of them, it's a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of time and energy. So now they just bought themselves 30 or 45 more days before they can actually get those contracts. So sorry, I'll let you
Exactly
keep
right.
going with what the
Yeah,
process
no,
looks like.
that's a great example. That I actually haven't heard that one before, but that's a perfect illustration of what clients are facing. So we
Well,
will
and then they just give up, quite frankly, and
exactly.
unfortunately, without somebody like you guys. So the fact that this letter of authorization ends up allowing you guys to negotiate on their behalf.
Yep. We get this letter of authorization. It gives us the ability to legally, on their behalf, as a steward of their business, go and get those contracts and interact directly with the vendor. And it turns out that's enormously valuable for the client. That ends up being
Oh yeah, because
right.
you just took so much of the work off of them.
Exactly. Takes the work off of them. It gives them kind of a relief of, okay, wow, someone's going to go help us with this. So we will do that. We'll ingest the data. In the absence of that data, we will go on behalf of the client to talk to the vendors to get the data. We then begin to build the brain. And so every client has what we call a microsite, and it's theirs. It's literally their brain. They name it. We begin ingesting the data into that site. That becomes their SpendBrain. We begin to process the invoices as they come in. We will do what's called a golden question workshop, where as we're building the ontology, we want to understand from the client, what are the most critical questions that you want to ask of your spend? And for every company, it's different. One of our clients really wanted to understand, from purchasing of materials to a salesperson quoting a price to a proposal to a sold and invoiced deal, what were the anomalies through that chain of events? And so we built an ontology around that. For other clients, they want to just know, hey, within a 5% margin of error across all of these vendors, we want to understand when prices change. Or, maybe it's specific to a linens and laundry vendor where they want to make sure there's anomalies when, for example, speaking of shenanigans, there are particular vendors that have company policies where when a driver delivers product to said store, if they deliver additional product that wasn't purchased, that product nonetheless will be billed.
Yeah, it just shows up on the invoice, whether
Shows up on the
whether
invoice.
they asked for it or not, or they're just walking through the back door and saying, "Hey, it looks like you guys are out of aspirin." They'll throw aspirin in the little deal,
Yep.
and now it's a $50 bottle of aspirin where you could have gone down to CVS 2 doors down, and it's $8.
Exactly right. And so an example of one of those golden questions could be, show me any time a product that was not on the original invoice is billed, right? And so
Mhm.
we construct these golden questions and prioritize, the vendors and the relationships we want to start with. Then we begin processing the invoices. Anomalies are detected. And it's kind of a pane of glass where the client is on one side monitoring this, and our experts are also on the other side monitoring. And we have a conversation, say, hey, we've noticed this vendor has errantly billed you 2 months in a row. Would you like us to go recover those funds? Or would you like us to recover those funds and negotiate and re-procure a better deal that is structured more in alignment with your business? So it's a living relationship. And there's a scoreboard, and that scoreboard for us is savings. Literally on the client site, they
Mhm.
see how much money we are saving them every day, every week, every month, every quarter. That's our North Star. And it's right there. And, from my experience, restaurant ownership groups and owners care about same store sales. They care about net operating income. They care about EBITDA, and they care about those things because when they can stick the landing on those numbers, it means they can invest in the guest experience.
Yep.
They can hire more people. They can build additional stores. So those things become, along with the savings, the North Star for our relationship, and we track it maniacally.
I love that you guys have a customized deal. I finished Will Guidara's book, Unreasonable Hospitality, earlier this year. Just the fact that, certain things you've got to measure down to the penny, and then other things you want to spend extravagantly on. And to your point, there are going to be certain brands that are like, again, a couple of years ago, I read the book of, Horst Schultz about, the Ritz Carlton and kind of how they do things. And it's just, hey, you know what? They're okay to spend extravagantly on certain things, but on other things, you want to make sure that you're really tight. And so the fact that you guys customize that to match the brand doesn't paint everything with the same broad brush, I guess.
It's exactly right. It matters the kind of tomatoes you have in your store, because I've heard Danny Meyer talk about this, that, you know, th- his grandmother's tomatoes that she grew in the garden, and that was like where he began to really love food, and that it brought people together. And he uses the tomatoes as almost an analogy for like working with a team. And it matters. That matters.
Mhm.
Who your linens and laundry vendor is, or your waste hauler, may not matter as much.
As
Or
long as the
your
service is good and it's and performing the duties and it meets the
right.
spec, you're in a good spot, right?
Right. And I think we all agree that regardless of who that vendor is, we expect to be billed accurately.
Yeah. No,
We
for
would
sure.
expect that the contract be honored. And even if it's our brother-in-law's regional hauler firm or a family connection with a linens and laundry vendor, we would all still expect that we are not leaving a tip, and that we are just paying for what we originally bought. Uh, and that's where even just turning on SpendBrain is saving clients 3% of anything that's loaded into it without us negotiating or touching anything, just by detecting those errors.
And making somebody aware so that they can go back and fix them. Well, I'd
Correct.
love one last piece before we jump into kind of what is it, how do they get in touch, Eric? You mentioned earlier in our conversation the fact that you guys will also benchmark. And I think that's really, really powerful. Benchmarking against other brands. Obviously, and I'm gonna pick a brand that's nationally recognized. Chick-fil-A is gonna have more buying power than the brand that has 4 chicken restaurants that are selling fried chicken
Yeah.
in their deal. So I can only assume Chick-fil-A is going to get better chicken pricing from their chicken purveyor than the guy that owns 4 stores. And at the same time, linens maybe aren't the same. And I guess I'd love to understand, how do you guys manage that? Because like for like, KFC and Chick-fil-A, they don't want anybody to know what they're doing, but at the same time, they want to know that they're not getting screwed, pricing wise. And so I'd love to have you share a little bit about how you guys do the benchmarking across the different brands regionally and nationally, I guess.
You got, I first want to say, and this is almost a spiritual quest for the company. We care about this deeply. We believe that for the past 30 years, big tech companies have learned from everyone's data, and especially small, mid-size companies that or loading things into different tools. Those tech companies are learning from, and in some cases, just aping the data of that company. We do not allow, and all of our clients when they become a SpendBrain contract, they see this literally the first 5 pages articulate that nobody, including us, can learn from their data. So that's core to what we're doing. No one can. It's not a public LLM. There's nothing that's shared. It is the client's brain. It's private. We can't even learn from it. What we do learn from is on the vendor side, the past 35 years that we've been able to negotiate and collect data in those vendor negotiations. We do know what the prices look like for large franchise operators, for small regional ones. We know the nuances of geography. We know the nuances of, mix of vendor. And so it's all aggregated and collected and has been for the past 35 years. But I did want to call out that it's not that we can pull up and say a Chick-fil-A would look like this. We actually wouldn't know, but we do know what those vendors might be charging a large, store, footprint in these regions. And I think our clients appreciate that because it's, we talk a lot internally about this is the moment that companies should decide only they can learn from their data. And we really believe that. And so the SpendBrain clients that are out there are learning a lot from their data, and no one else can. And it's pretty cool to watch.
Well, and I love that you guys have just layered on what you guys have been doing for 35 years with teams of analysts, and you still have them, and you still have the people that are helping, and it's human aided technology that's doing this. And so, Eric, I guess what can people expect? Like, you talked about kind of what onboarding looks like. You guys try and make it as low lift as possible. I guess how do you guys make money? How do they engage with you guys to get started? Because it almost seems like a no brainer. It's like, why would you not at least engage with your team to figure out how much money you can save, and inevitably it will pay for itself. Whatever they're paying you, you're going to make a small percentage of what you're saving that restaurant brand. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, that's right. The question you asked, why would they not? It's one that we ask all the time. I like to think that not everyone knows about us yet, and that's.
I had never heard. I mean, I've been in the restaurant space for 30 years, and I've heard of the PEO, or not PEOs, but the people that are looking to, that are doing group food buying and things like that. But I've never heard of somebody that their entire job is to go look at everything that's going on until you guys came, to be on the show. So I'm excited about it.
So I think honestly, a big part of it is awareness. I just think a lot of companies don't know that this exists and that there is a tool that they can use as a weapon to fight back against the spend more world, and that you can make reducing costs as easy as spending money, that this exists. So that's one. The second reason that I think maybe folks aren't doing it is, sometimes there can be the perception that this is my job. If I brought these guys in, isn't that my job? And it goes back to everything we were talking about earlier. It's impossible to do that job, even with an army of contract managers. How could you look at contract to invoice every time it's processed, map all those GL codes, all the nuances, all the shenanigans, do it across every vendor relationship while having the expertise across all categories to know whether you've got the right deal, and if not, how you can get a better deal? That's an impossible ask. And
unless you're completely vertically integrated, you have the entire supply chain yourself. That's exactly the only way it's possible, because but even then, depending upon your incentive program, the people that are supplying your beef might raise your prices so that they can hit bonus this quarter, and you might not even know it.
Exactly right. And so we stand alongside our clients. We are their tool, their weapon, their consigliere. Our main job is to get them promoted, make them successful, save the company money, help them achieve that North Star so that they can invest in technology, hire more people, build new stores. And when we frame our relationship like that, I think we can really handle that objection. But that tends to be it. And so I think you asked earlier about how does this work? How do we get paid? And there's kind of three principal deal shapes with clients. And we're flexible. We're malleable in how we work with companies because everyone's at a different level with different needs. Any of our clients want us to just come in, build them a SpendBrain, and there's a fee associated with that. That fee is totally self-funded based on the savings that it will achieve, and
absolutely,
typically within 6 months to less than a year. So there's that pack. Other clients want us to build their SpendBrain and then get hands-on and actually negotiate and optimize like all of their contracts with vendors. In that case, there's that annual fee for SpendBrain and then a small saving share when we help renegotiate and optimize a contract and save the client millions of dollars. We take a small percentage of that as incentive for our deal teams to go and get a great deal. Then there's a third element, which is clients that want us to build their brain, procure and optimize contracts, and they want us to manage vendors and pay their bills. So turns out paying bills specifically to like utilities companies is something that nobody enjoys doing and is very difficult. And there's a whole myriad of issues and challenges associated with that. And so we have many clients that say, hey, do just manage this for us. And we'll do that oftentimes for a flat fee for the whole program. So different ways to work. All of it is self-funded based on the savings. In that regard, we view it as risk-free. We view it as totally performance-based, and proud to have clients that have been with us for 15, 20 plus years and a really high retention rate that we reset our own baseline. So we can't coast. So a company that's been with us for 20 years, it means that we've saved them money every year. Constantly.
Yeah, you have to keep earning your keep every year, because if you don't,
Exactly.
they'll up and leave. So
Yep.
Eric, how do they get in touch with you? How do they get in touch with the company? Again, I'm sitting out here and I'm like, you know what? I need this in my life. I didn't even know this existed. How do I get more of this now?
Yeah,
Where do they connect with you? Where do they connect with the team?
you bet. We're at aboutsib.com, and it's SIB, like spendintelligencebrain.com. LinkedIn, out there on X, on Meta. You'll probably be hit with a Meta ad after you've listened to this, if our targeting works. We're at restaurant events, are hopefully everywhere. When you're in an airport in the couple months after this comes out, I hope that you'll see a SpendBrain ad in the airport and a banner. But I think you'll see more about us in 2026 as we start to really gain critical mass. We're surprised at the size of the companies coming to us. A couple Fortune 30, Fortune 20 clients that want us to build a SpendBrain for them. And we suspect that more companies are going to be wanting to do something like this. Kind of the ontology-based spend intelligence is going to be a critical step for CFOs, for heads of procurement, certainly for restaurant operators and franchise operators in 2026.
Yeah, no, now that it's like anything else. Once you've seen it, now you can't unsee it. And now it's like, why do more people not have what Eric and the team are doing? Well, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing kind of what you guys have been doing. Grateful to have you. To our listeners, guys, like I said at the onset, I know you guys got lots of choices. So thanks for hanging out this week. If you haven't already done so, please go subscribe to the show and make it a great day.